I recently read the book Peak: How to Master Almost Anything by authors Anders Ericsson and Robert Poole. I picked up this book knowing that Anders Ericsson was the fellow who came up with the 10,000 hours to mastery rule. But it turns out the 10,000 hour rule isn't a rule at all. In fact, simply doing something for hours and hours is no guarantee that you'll improve. Anders says that doctors who have practiced for 20 years are no better than doctors who've been practicing for 5 years if they feel they've reached a level of acceptable performance. In fact, Anders says, those who believe that their skills are good enough and choose to go on autopilot are actually worse in the absence of deliberate practice. Now, why is that? Well, deliberate practice is necessary to push yourself out of your comfort zone and force yourself to come up with what he calls mental representations. Anders says, what sets expert performers apart from everyone else is the quality and the quantity of their mental representations. Through years of practice, they develop highly complex and sophisticated representations of the various situations they are likely to encounter in their fields. For example, look at grandmaster chess players. They are all able to play entire games of chess blindfolded. In fact, the world champion between 1927 and 1935 could play 32 games of chess simultaneously while blindfolded. To do so, he had to hold the entire chessboard in his memory and move pieces around in his mind, trying various lines of play. Golfers are able to condense an entire string of complex movements that make up the golf swing and replicate and represent that swing with a single thought or feeling. Masters have achieved mastery because they've come up with effective mental representations that allow them to recreate entire experiences in their mind, accurately predict long sequences of events in their domain, and condense large amounts of information into seemingly simple mental representations. These mental representations take on the form of words, images, and feelings. Anders Ericsson says that, more than anything else, mental representations explain the difference in performance between novices and experts. So what exactly is this deliberate practice Anders talks of, and how does it force us to come up with these sophisticated mental representations of our craft? The best place to look is at a study that Anders did early in his 30-year career studying expert performers. Anders recruited an undergraduate student from Carnegie Mellon University named Steve Falloon to come in to his office multiple times a week for 1 hour at a time to listen to a string of random digits and repeat them back to him using only his working memory, his short-term memory. Each session, Anders would give Steve a set of digits to recall. If he got that right, he would add a digit. If he got it wrong, he would take off 2 digits. So he'd go from 6 to 7 to 8. If he got 8 wrong, he'd go back to 6 to 7. So that way he was always operating on the boundary between what he could and couldn't do. After about 4 sessions, Steve got to the point where he could reliably recite 7 digits. And many studies had shown that the capacity of human short-term memory was about 7 units of information. Now at that point, Steve tried to improve beyond 7 digits. Session after session, he would run into a wall of frustration, being unable to recall more than 7 digits time after time. But because this was an experiment, he came back each week trying to improve. Then one day he came in, and he was on a roll. He got 8, then 9, then 10 digits in a row, and finally squeaked out 11 digits by the end of the session. This pattern of progress, hitting a perceived limit to his abilities, experiencing prolonged frustration, and then having a breakthrough, happened over and over again. It happened at 22 digits, 34 digits, and all the way up. After 200 sessions, Steve could recall 82 digits. 82. That's 75 more than what was considered possible at the time. And he did this by activating what Anders would later call the 4 components of purposeful practice. First, he had a well-defined specific goal. His short-term targets were extremely obvious. If he was able to recall 13 digits, he knew his next goal was 14. Second, his practice sessions were intense periods of undistracted focus. For an hour, all he would focus on was trying to remember digits. Third, he received feedback after each attempt. In other words, his feedback was immediate and easy to understand. He either got it right or he didn't. And lastly, he was constantly being pushed outside of his comfort zone by operating just on the edge of his abilities. And he frequently made mistakes. He would move up one, move up another, but then go back 2 if he failed. The structured approach of purposeful practice forced Steve's mind to come up with creative mental representations. The intense focus and the repeated discomfort basically conditioned his mind to believe that he didn't come up with a creative insight, he would continue to suffer. And since the mind is very resourceful, it was only a matter of time before he would have a creative breakthrough.
So I just want to talk about the two blocks of the deliberate practice here. The first one is intense focus, and then the second one is frequent discomfort, which fascinates me. If you make your body and mind, or put yourself in an area of discomfort, your body and mind then searches for amazing next level creative solutions.
And he did this by activating what Anders would later call the 4 components of purposeful practice. His practice sessions were intense periods of undistracted focus. For an hour, all he would focus on was trying to remember digits. And lastly, he was constantly being pushed outside of his comfort zone by operating just on the edge of his abilities. And he frequently made mistakes. He would move up one, move up another, but then go back 2 if he failed. The structured approach of purposeful practice forced Steve's mind to come up with creative mental representations. The intense focus and the repeated discomfort basically conditioned his mind to believe that he didn't come up with a creative insight, he would continue to suffer. And since the mind is very resourceful, it was only a matter of time before he would have a creative breakthrough. He creatively came up with a way of seeing the numbers attached to branches of a tree. This was a mental representation to condense and simplify incoming information. He had to be frustrated enough to come up with a creative solution to get past his barriers. At 7 digits, he discovered a way to see 4 digits as a single unit. At 22 digits, he was able to mentally group 6 digits as a single unit. In other words, his limits were a technique issue, not an effort issue. After the experiment with Steve, Anders started another experiment with a guy named Dario, Steve's friend. This time, Anders had Steve teach Dario his method for encoding digits. With this head start, Dario was able to improve much quicker than Steve had. He got to 20 digits in only a few sessions, all because he was able to adopt Steve's mental representations. But beyond that point, Dario didn't find Steve's techniques that effective, so he had to come up with some of his own. But with that head start, and with that framework to work on, Dario was able to recall 100 digits in his short-term memory. Anders Ericsson has found this to be the formula for deliberate practice: purposeful practice methods plus expert coaching. With this combination, you get the perfect formula for improvement. So if you're sick of putting in the hours and not improving at your craft, turn your time into a series of deliberate practice sessions like Steve Falloon experienced, and push yourself to discover new mental representations. At the end of the day, simply doing does not mean you're improving. Mastery is not just about putting in 10,000 hours. It's about 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. Anders says the right sort of practice carried out over a significant period of time leads to improvement. Nothing else will. That was a core message that I gathered from Peak. The book is written by the foremost expert on peak performance, and if you want to discover how far your abilities can go, I highly recommend picking up a copy of this book.